This is the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, the best wrestler in the world. And you're watching the best wrestling talk show in the world, the Wrestling Roundtable.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. We are switching up the panel as we usually do. Alex Payne and Shane Hagadorn, former Ring of Honor alumni, the former Hellions too. So that's appropriate to have some people with pro experience. I mean, myself, I went from ring crew to ring announcer, but not quite like you guys. You guys took the punishment. So that's going to lead into some interesting takes on why do you love pro wrestling? Of course, the Wrestling Roundtable, that's what we've been talking about for most of our tenure. But how did you get into pro wrestling? Obviously, we all started out as fans, as most people usually do. How did you become one?
Watching wrestling as a child with my dad. I remember watching tapes, especially WrestleMania 6, and watching Hogan versus Warrior. That's like the match to me as a kid.
Me too. That was April 1st, 1990, and that was my first pay-per-view, and that's what really sparked it. I was obviously a big Hulk Hogan fan, and going into that.
So that was a big April Fool's joke on
Warrior winning the championship.
For me, it was right around the same time, although I do remember tidbits of watching like King Kong Bundy at my grandma's apartment and seeing the NBC Saturday Night main event with Savage attacking Hogan and this and that. But around 1990, WrestleMania 6 is where I really started following closely. Just the fact that they could make me see two guys want to kill each other, basically, me so interested in it, really just made me a fan and got me hooked. And just the overall production and the drama that they could bring, the entertainment is what I really loved about it.
The reason I've said on the show before that when we talked about the IWC and the internet, there's no more magic, like Bobby Heenan said, not for me, because I don't know if it's because I'm more analytical, more technical, but I like, even if I get a movie on DVD, I want to know the behind the scenes, I want to know the making of. And when I knew that I was going to get into pro wrestling, I'm like, well, now I'm really going to have to know all the surprises and how things go. And it's interesting being behind the curtain, knowing the format of the show. Okay, this is when so-and-so is going to make the surprise appearance, and seeing the people react to it. I don't necessarily have to be one of them, but I like seeing the process unfold. And when you become a pro wrestler, though, what's the difference? What's the mindset to go from this side of the guardrail to that side of the guardrail, and what made you become a fan?
I think becoming a wrestler almost instantaneously makes you more critical and more perceptive of the little details. Why did this work? Why did this not work? What could I have done? So many people don't even watch their own matches back because it just turns into, well, this sucked. I hated this. Everything about this sucked. Why do I keep wrestling? This is all bad. You just see, in hindsight, everything that you could have done that would have made this spot be a little bit better. Played to the crowd at this moment because they were ready for it and I didn't notice. Like,
is that because everyone in their heart is always trying to be like fantasizing, fantasy booker, fantasy wrestler?
Or they fantasize more of themselves in the shoes of their role models in a lot of ways. If I go back and watch my matches, especially when I was younger, and I'm thinking like, if I played the hard cam here, I could have been more like if I was watching Bret Hart or if I was watching Hogan or Warrior, any of those. Like, I think of the guys that were really good at that stuff, and I want to be akin to them. Like, that's why I got into wrestling to begin with. You want to be like the guys that you are following in their footsteps in some ways. With Bryan Danielson or Aries or anybody else.
We've seen other wrestlers where if they don't put on like 5-star matches right away and say, I want my match to be better than the Iron Man match or whatever, do they get like disappointed even if it was good but maybe didn't live up to like their own standards, or other people like always trying to...
There's lots of guys like that. I mean, we've seen it backstage. Like, Nigel McGinnis could have had like the best match on the freaking card, and he'll come back and like, oh mate, that match sucked. I don't know. I think he's so critical of himself. His performance in front of 500, 1,000 people, 2,000 people was tremendous, but he's beaten himself up critically. Like Brian, like there's some times like there was a match I think he had with Joe, actually, the 1 hour draw, and it was a good match, but he said it could have been better. The fans loved it, but deep down thought it was okay.
Okay, wrestlers are their own worst critics in a way,
far.
Obviously, but people are like that.
Because they're artists.
Right, and that's what's going to segue into the next question. Is wrestling an art? Because when we're talking about what we love about pro wrestling, there's a lot that goes into this show. I wrote an essay years ago, you can see it on WrestlingRoundtable.com, about all the different aspects of art that come together in pro wrestling. That's what makes it this originally unique American art form, because I'm not the biggest fan of pro wrestling most of the time, because I also think pro wrestling is also its own worst enemy. It lives in its own bubble in a way. But if I was to say to somebody, here's an example of why pro wrestling can be so great, when it's good, it's so good. Because you got all the elements coming together of storyline, of writing, music, visuals. athletic performance, that all comes together in some of these great moments. And I think that's what really hooks us as fans, because that makes us stick through. I watched just waiting for something good to happen, which I gave up on years ago, but people still hold on to those. They want it to be good. They want it to be great. So
there's two things that stand out in my mind that can explain exactly why I love pro wrestling. The first one is Low-Key's promo from Crowning Champion after he won the belt about his art. And you can just see the passion and the exhaustion. I was never in the Murphy rack.
I was for that.
Exactly.
And I was sitting in the crowd.
Exhaustion and how hot that building was. It's legendary in its own right, in the same way the ECW arena is for the venue. Like the passion, what he says when he's speaking from the heart about his love for pro wrestling. The other one that defines wrestling for me is right here. The first 5 minutes of this DVD, watch it. It, to me, is exactly why pro wrestling is a beautiful thing. I'm not going to tell you what it says. You need to buy it and watch it for yourself, but it just encapsulates everything that's beautiful about pro wrestling.
Yeah, and he does a good job of explaining it to people. But like I'm saying, if you were to say to somebody, here's an example of why I love pro wrestling, maybe it's some of your own work or maybe it's someone else's, what's an example?
Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect from SummerSlam 91. There's a great story told. It's dramatic. It's Bret Hart winning his very first Intercontinental Championship. They told a great athletic contest. The drama of Mr. Perfect, his back kind of hurting throughout that match. It was really, really cool, especially in hindsight when you know about the backstory. It's a great match.
Well, I think that's because Bret Hart perfectly exemplifies how wrestling is an art. He was probably the greatest artist that we ever had in pro wrestling, because to me, those matches, some of his best stuff, flow together like paintings, and they're different yet related and creative. He was really a great artist, and also one half of what I thought was the best wrestling match ever, him and Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10 in the opener. But what do you think was a great example of why do you love pro wrestling?
Bryan and Kenta. I know it's a match that we've referenced a lot of times on many
Especially
different shows, but with pro wrestling, there's so many unpredictable factors. You can't plan on Bryan having the injury that he did going into that match.
Plus, when that sort of thing happens too, a lot of people, especially cynical people, or maybe don't even know a lot about wrestling, they'll just assume that it's fake. They'll assume it's set up.
Yep.
Even now with this Montreal Screwjob was a work, and this was a work, and it's got, what if, blah, blah, blah. It's bullshit. You and I, and we know that that was legit. He was in real pain. So maybe we brought more into that match than maybe the fans there at the Manhattan Center, but I think that was the best match Ring of Honor ever had.
Exactly, and the story of his injury, the story of Kenta had basically run through everybody, and Bryan hadn't beaten him. It culminated in just this perfect display of pro wrestling.
Thank you for sharing your firsthand experience about what it's like being in the ring and why you still love pro wrestling. But we're going to get some fans' comments when we come back. More of why we love pro wrestling on the Wrestling Roundtable.
When I was 14 years old, I had a dream. A dream that nearly a decade later, I couldn't forget. I thought it was my destiny to be a professional wrestler on national TV. A decade later, I finally made it. Or so I thought. In less than a year, it was over.
Right, so you disappear, you're off television, you're done. What's the story?
And nobody knew why.
I think a lot of people have read on the internet that I've got hepatitis C, and everybody else thinks I've just got brain damage.
This is the story of my final tour. On the shows where I started, with the people I knew.
No, I can't wrestle anymore. Please feel sorry for me.
It was the last time I'd ever wrestle. The last chance to say goodbye. The last hope for a resolution. The last of McGinnis.
All right, Rodney Will in Orlando.
This is it. This is it. I'm trying not to cry, man.
The last 15 minutes.
The last 15 minutes, take it all in.
It's all 15 minutes of fame, that makes sense.
I told you, right, that someone from who works for Bellator recognized me from the show? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, he works for Bellator, and then like he stopped me like when I was leaving.
Hey, let's on the round table.
Yeah. Guy was huge too.
I got recognized by myself after that.
皆さんこんにちは。プロレスリングノアの健太です。レスリングラウンドテーブル絶対見逃さないように。
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. The final panel will be Will Brooks, Orlando Neal, myself, and Rodney LeConte. And we were talking about, why do you love professional wrestling? What got you into pro wrestling in the first place?
My grandfather was a big wrestling fan. They had a tape of WrestleMania 3, and I would watch it ad nauseum. We used to visit the house every year. To the point where, like, I would think the K&M Connection was the next great tag team coming up. Of course, they didn't last. But I was so into this WrestleMania that I watched it all the time in loop. And Hogan, my superhero, my idol growing up. My family used to get a kick out of me doing all the poses and everything. And I couldn't get enough of him, and it just hooked me in.
For our age range, Hogan was the guy like Bruno Sammartino was for other Northeast fans who were older than us. And he is that superhero character that got me into pro wrestling, like I mentioned. But WrestleMania 3, Hogan body slamming Andre, to me, I've said before, I think is the pinnacle of the sport. That, to me, is like the greatest moment in pro wrestling history. But what made you become a fan, Orlando? Because you're a great fan of all different things from around the world, independence. You're really into it.
Yeah, towards the end of the Hogan run, it was like 1991. I still remember being a kid, and my sister put it on as like Channel 5 Wrestling Challenge Saturday morning, and Bret Hart is getting his ass whooped by the Barbarian. Holy crap, what is this big guy doing? Stop, leave him alone. and it was like Bret Hart being one of the greatest storytellers. He's getting beat up, and I'm getting so into it, and then he just pulls off a small package and beats him. It's like, holy crap. He was my hero from that moment forward, and every Saturday morning Wrestling Challenge, Sunday morning Superstars, I was hooked.
You got it backwards.
Oh, well, you know what I meant.
Growing up, man, whenever I got like a bad grade and your parents try to punish you and like you can't watch TV for such and such period of time, they always said, but you can watch Raw. Because they knew if I could not watch Monday Night Raw, it would have killed me. To the point where if you think one, like D was bad, fuck the rest
I
of the
couldn't watch the
semester.
Iron Man match because of bad grades.
Wow. And
Yeah.
you know how I was taping everything every week. Like, I had a job that I had to work till 9 o'clock, and I didn't even want to do it, even though it was a few minutes away from my house, because I didn't want to miss a minute of Raw.
Nobody did, especially at that era. We go on Raw and Nitro. DVR came a little late, huh?
Oh, yeah, very late.
Going on about grades, I remember I used to have to get, every A I could get on my grades was a videotape that I could take out of the video store. And that's when Coliseum Home Video was big, and that was my only way of seeing wrestling. I didn't get cable till 97, so videotapes and magazines were big for me.
West Coast Video really helped me as a wrestling fan.
Yes,
Growing up.
definitely.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I was even thinking of doing for one of our final topics, is the idea of the chickens have come home to roost. And by that I mean, like, we talked about WrestleMania 29 last week, and one of the things that I've been talking about with WWE recently is their over-reliance on these part-timers once a year and not really giving too much of a shit about other times. I know the Raw after WrestleMania was a big deal for everyone this year, and they debuted a lot of new names. But this has been a running theme of ours through the show. Like, if you go back to our review of WrestleMania 25, and I just reamed them for all the names that they had that they weren't utilizing, and that's a big reason why I stopped watching in 2006. When I saw the writing on the wall with all these guys that were really over and really good and should be pushed into the next level, which is the same thing WCW didn't do, but WWE gets away with it. It just really turned me off as a fan, and I just keep wondering, how long is that going to last, where every year WrestleMania, is it going to be forever, that people tune in once a year and get 1 million buys, they fly every year 80,000 people? Is this going to happen no matter what the content? Does it matter? What do you think the future of the sport is?
It's hard to grasp because we don't know fully what Triple H wants to do with it. Like, we understand his ideas of what he wants to do with it, but it's one thing to have a great idea. It's another thing to, like, accomplish it, go through it fully. So, and we don't know whether or not TNA will finally, like, get to that level of what WCW was for them to be the competition 1 and 1A. It's kind of hard to tell. I don't think TNA can get there without a guy that's a marquee guy that they can, like, put on any channel they want to and say, hey, check out our guy. Unless they sign away a huge star like Cena or whatever, which is not going to happen. I think status quo.
Right, and maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, because maybe a lot of our longtime fans like us are like, oh, wrestling sucks now or whatever, but they're still making a lot of money. WWE is, especially. TNA is doing okay. Yeah. Ring of Honor not so much, but we've seen Japanese pro wrestling kind of go down since its heyday years ago. If you're WWE TNA doing 1 million viewers every week or whatever, maybe you're doing all right, but is that the way it's going to stagnate and be for the rest of our lives? Or because we talked about wrestling being cyclical before that theory, but we're long overdue for a mainstream acceptance at this point. Like, did MMA take over instead of that? Where do you think pro wrestling is going to go?
I don't think pro wrestling is going to evolve the way MMA will evolve, because it's not as...
It clearly
WWE
hasn't.
won't be as international as UFC will, and UFC is constantly building new weight classes and new stars are constantly rising. It's not like that in WWE, which is why me and you have really stopped watching. Something's going to have to fall in their lap for it to change.
They're
There's
not
going to
gonna
be a
do it
period of
themselves.
time where the Rocks, the Brocks, the Takers, they're going to be done with wrestling. They're going to be too old, or this could be like an injury way of calling it quits. Cena, he's still a young guy. Eventually, that dynamic of booing him, but he's supposed to be a good guy, is really going to get old. It's been going on 7 years.
It's already old already.
Yeah. Something's going to have to fall in their lap for it to change. I don't think something drastic is going to change, but there's going to have to be some sort of competition to WWE to make them work harder. Something that Nitro did. TNA's not there. They've been around for over 10 years, so it would have happened already. Someone's going to have to challenge Vince McMahon. That's the only way that pro wrestling is going to evolve.
Well, it's funny how you said like UFC is building new stars in it because they let it happen organically. They let guys go in the cage and do their thing. WF tries to control a little too much. Even when guys are getting over, they try to like do something to help them out. Like, no, you're making.
But they're
it
not
worse.
helping them out. They build them.
Worse.
No, not so much.
Or even guys are getting over naturally, like Zack Ryder was, or like how Dolph Ziggler kind of got over naturally. Like he's just having great matches every week. People started following him, and even Tony Cesaro, like he was not getting over it. Then he had a great match. I think it was with Kofi. All of a sudden, people started to click. This guy's having great matches.
Well, they need to
and
build
happen organically,
superheroes,
you know?
'cause, you know,
they try to control the build instead of letting it happen.
There's always valleys and peaks.
We've been on a plateau for a while.
Yes,
right?
yes, we have. We're waiting for these PG kids to grow up, and I think once they grow up, we might hit another peak, and I think that peak might come with a John Cena heel turn.
I don't see it.
I think that might be it.
Drastic times call for drastic measures, and we're not just there yet. That's what's so sad.
Repeating history, like people keep trying to recreate the Hogan '96 thing, isn't necessarily going to work. I think you make new history, and that's how you succeed. But what's an example of why you love pro wrestling? Because you have tuned in, tuned out, and come back and forth. What's an example you would say to someone, this is why I came back, this is why I love pro wrestling?
It's like any movie that you love or TV show or anything of the sort where, or even like a sport, you invest in these characters. Why do I still watch Rocky to this day hoping he still wins? Why do I care? Because I love the character and I follow him. Why is 24 my favorite TV show? Because I love Jack Bauer and I love to see him save the country and stop terrorism. It's the same thing with wrestling. You get involved in these characters and you follow them. And then with actual wrestling, you get to see them accomplish goals, even if it's on a weekly basis. You see them take down evildoers, I guess you could say, or capture the title that they so desperately want. And you see them rising up and come back. And it's wonderful to see, when it's done right, it's fucking awesome. I left because it was boring me and I was just going through a different phase of my life. I came back because I just slowly started going back, watching the old clips and realized, oh yeah, I remember this. It was a lot of fun. It was great. Okay, let me check out Raw. Let's see what's going on. And actually, when I got back in, I wasn't even a fan. I actually didn't like what I was seeing, but it's something that caught it back in me. That fire of wanting to see it be better, and I just had to watch it.
I've kind of given up on that a little bit. And Lawrence said to me recently, come on, we're going to watch wrestling forever. And maybe he's right in the sense that I will watch old stuff, old Nitros, old WCW, old WWF, old ECW, whatever it might be. That appeals to me more because it just seems from the new millennium on, it's lost its soul. It just becomes more manufactured and more set up, right? And when you watch old stuff, it's got that heart, it's got that spirit, it's got that trueness to the characters and the story that I don't see anymore. But what's an example of why you love pro wrestling?
I grew up since a toddler watching pro wrestling, and I haven't spoke about it here, but when I was 16, I actually came down with cancer, which would explain my appearance. When I was sick, I actually had a chance to go in the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And being 16 is like, I don't want to go to Disney World with my parents. You know, the only thing that kept me happy while I was sick was watching wrestling. I said, you know what? I want to go to WrestleMania. I was actually able to go to WrestleMania 23 in Detroit, and I had a blast. I thought it was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but like I stated last week, I was able to go to WrestleMania 29. Wrestling has always been able to keep me entertained, and it's something personal with me that I just love, and then I know that I'll stay with pretty much forever.
And you said on Rodney's documentary, the Behind the Lens, that this is something you can't talk about with everybody walking down the street. And I don't want to front on pro wrestling too much because my best friends that I've met have been because of pro wrestling. So I also got a lot of great experiences and friends for life behind the camera and whatever from my tenure in pro wrestling. Those guys and memories I will take with me forever. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm hating on pro wrestling at the end because I realize what it brought to me and what it brought to my life. What do you think is an example of why you love pro wrestling?
Well, I'm going to give you 3 short ones. First is the element of surprise. I always thought that pro wrestling really excelled in element of surprise, such as Cena coming back in the Rumble of 2008. Then there's just the satisfaction of seeing the good guy win, like Goldberg in summer of '98 beating Hogan, where I was so behind this guy to the point where I was in my room counting with the ref on the floor, and I felt like I won the title. And then, like we talked about in the last segment, the art of storytelling, like Bret and Austin in WrestleMania 13. All the elements just came together. The crowd was hot, the commentators were on point, and the fact that like these two had such a heated rivalry that they had to bring in an ultimate fighter to control these guys. It wasn't like the Iron Man match, but they're still able to tell a story with good wrestling and backstories that were implemented in that match. You were just like, wow, you couldn't write that.
And where it led to was even better.
Exactly. In fact, they had two characters pretty much switch sides was unbelievable.
But what we're kind of touching upon here, and I think this is what appeals to our audience too, and why they feel like you guys have said, you guys remind me of our friends talking about wrestling. And I think that's what a lot of our audience feels. It's a communal thing in a way. Like people always say, go to the movie theater and you experience it with other people. I'm not like that. But when we go to, let's say, Bound for Glory in Philadelphia, and we are all as a group collectively, you could say that about WrestleMania too, experiencing like Hogan's face turn with Sting and all that stuff. That's something that you experience with other people, and that brings that bond together.
And when you meet someone who's a fellow wrestling fan, you could talk about hours with it.
Right.
And it's complete strangers.
We have.
Exactly.
So I hope that you've enjoyed our talks on pro wrestling over the many hours and episodes that we've done. So this is it, guys. Do you have any final words to say to the audience? And I am just glad that you guys in particular are here, because you two started off as fans of the show and you've been all about the show since you've been on it. So what do you say to the audience that you were a part of?
I was part of something truly great that I was, again, a fan of. I was a fan of you guys on Facebook, and you guys said you were promoting a show 20 minutes from my house. I'm like, I gotta go to that. And I got to meet you guys there that night. It was actually a lot of fun. It was my first wrestling event in years, and it was a lot of fun. But being out in the chat room every Monday night, I gotta give a shout out to the guys who were there almost every week with me. So here's to Caligula, Version, Roy, Royce, Jeremy, 90s, and Hodge. Thank you guys. You guys are great, and I will continue to be there every Monday night if I can.
I just want to thank Eric first for all your dedication to this show, and so to all the guys here, all the past panelists. I've had a great time on the show. It's not every day, again, where you could go and talk about something you love so much. I had a great time here. I just want to thank all the fans that continue to support the Roundtable, and thank you for enjoying us.
From when the show started, back in my room in '06, the conversations with me, Eric, and Lawrence, the gears started turning into the show. I kind of knew because of our experience and our conversations that people were going to view it, but I just didn't know how much. And to see fans like you guys come on the show and the panelists come in and make something that on paper could seem like a lot of work just flow seamlessly, because you're with friends and you talk about wrestling and other stuff, and you feel, even though we may not see each other every day, but it's as if we just did this like last week. Mm-hmm. And to the fans, thanks again for really taking the time to watch all our shows and comment and really give us great support and motivation in continuing this. Yeah, it's been a really great ride, and thank you again for radio shows and coming up to us at events. I was recognized by someone at Bellator in Atlantic City last week, and yeah, it's just a really cool feeling. So thanks again, and keep up the support, and the Roundtable will not die.
And that's something that I wanted to emphasize to everybody. Even though the series might be ending, the accounts are still going to be open. Blog Talk Radio, our archives over there. Go Fight Live, our archives over there. YouTube, of course, we're going to stay here, and you can look up everything that we have there. The Facebook group, the Facebook fan page, Twitter, we're going to still be all there, so the conversation will not die with the end of this show. You keep it going. You've been a fan of ours a long time. Thank you very much, and we're going to keep it going. But for myself as the host of the show, and really the one doing everything behind the scenes with as far as editing and money and whatnot, when you put out the Behind the Lens documentary, at first I was wondering at the beginning when the narrator said that we were an internet success. The word success really made me start think, because of course my first reaction is like, thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours later, I don't know if we're a success, because I'm an ambitious person. I wanted this to go far. When I saw what was happening on YouTube years ago, and I thought we could carve out our own niche, I thought we could do better than everybody. And when I look at the views that the videos get, they're fine and they're great because I certainly wasn't going to continue this if 12 people were watching. But at the same time, I see others that I think are lesser quality than us as far as the content. And I try to do the best that we can as far as production, but it didn't go nearly as far as I would have wanted it to. Yes, I did send out packages last year to try shop around the show to different networks. Didn't get a response. I tried sending feelers to Sirius XM and other sort of radio things. And because this is not ending because of content, believe me. I think if we had a 3-hour radio show every day, Monday through Friday, we would never run out of content. That sounds ambitious, but I believe it's true. It's not that we're running out of content. It's really just a matter of time and money, because at this point in my life, I'm in a real transition period and I don't know what's next. This takes up a lot of time. It takes about 10 minutes for me to edit 1 minute of footage. And if you consider 70 shows, 50 radio shows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it takes up a lot of time and I need to really just move on at this point. So one person said, and it was really nice, it was Gary McDivitt who made a donation to us a few weeks ago. Thank you, Gary. He said, you're going out on top and you're going out on your own terms. So I kind of like that. And in terms of success, I mentioned Roger Ebert last week, and you've talked to me about it. Lawrence has talked to me about it. And a lot of people have tried putting it in perspective to me. And I think it's right. What's the definition of success? It depends. Well, financial success? Not really. Our Google AdSense account got suspended. I'm real upset about that. It was very discouraging. YouTube just decimated views and subscribers last year. It was very discouraging. But Roger Ebert, like I said, had this quote that really made me think. And he said, "We must contribute joy to the world. That is true no matter what our problems, our health, our circumstances. We must try." And like you were talking about coming to the Pro Wrestling Respect show that we promoted, Chuck Jasmine in Connecticut listened to our show, drove all the way down from Connecticut to Burlington, New Jersey because of our radio show. Gary McDivitt and other people have written us and told us how many times that I wasn't an MMA fan before, but now I've gone to my first UFC in England because of you guys. That is really cool. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And that's the power of the internet, and that's the power of your mind, to connect with other people. You've had tons of people recognize you because of the show. I've had people come up to me and say, "Hey, I like your show. It's great." Even Mike Seidel told me that someone found out about him from our show. And if we're doing that, that's really great to see and great to think about. So in terms of success, maybe we are. And we want you to stay with us. So keep subscribing, keep watching, and you can go back and watch us anytime. Like I said, that's going to stay open. And maybe whatever else we do in the future, hey, someone said maybe this is a pro wrestling sort of retirement. Maybe we'll come back. I don't know. I wouldn't keep my fingers crossed.
Never say never.
Never say never. I'm not saying never. Maybe we'll do something in the future, and whatever it is, we hope you join us for that. So thank you very much for everything over the years. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. So for the panel of Will Brooks, Orlando O'Neill, Shane Hagadorn, Alex Payne, Rodney LeConte, I'm the host, Eric Santamaria, and this was the Wrestling Roundtable, but so are you.
I have to thought you were going to say the balcony's closed.
Is that it? Good job, everybody. Good job.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks for letting us use your house.
We did it. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for
I
coming.
think we need to go upstairs and thank the entire family.
Not the baby. The baby.
Wow.
Thank you.
We did it. Thank you.
All right, so when's the next time we all get together?